What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another look at CBCS and CGC graded Star Wars comic books. Also, at the end, there were a number of really nice non-Star Wars books that sold in auctions that I had to show you just because they don't show up very much on eBay. But right now, I think is a really good time to be picking up key issue comics, whatever you collect. And the prices obviously are down. We've covered this at length in other market updates. I personally am focusing most of my, if not all, of my collecting dollars towards key issue CGC graded comics. I just think that now's a good time to be picking up some of these books that I never thought I would own. And I've had a lot of good luck over the last 2 or 3 months picking up some key issues. So I wanted to at least show you some recent sales. We're going to start with the vintage Star Wars books from the original Marvel run. We'll dig into some Dark Horse and some modern comics, and then we'll save some of the non-Star Wars books for the end for those of you that don't collect them. I just had to at least show them because they were some books that I tracked. First is a CGC 9.6 for Star Wars #1, the book that started it all. Really great looking copy here with the brand new case style. This had really nice centering and colors. And, just one of those books that I'm eventually going to have to break down and buy. I think I'm going to aim for this book next year. I've gotten pretty much all of the vintage Marvel books that I wanted to get. Star Wars 42, the first Boba Fett. Star Wars 68, the first Mandalorians. Star Wars 81. There's a number of different key issue books from the original Marvel run that I've managed to pick up over the last year or so. But Star Wars #1's not one of them. This 9.6 sold in an auction for $900 plus $12.45 shipping. And a lot of different YouTubers that cover the comic book market better than me, they all talk about how a CGC 9.6, that's a near mint comic. And is it worth paying up for a 9.8 when you can get a 9.6 for substantially less? And that's true for Star Wars #1. This is a 9.6 that sold in an auction for $900, and then here is the 9.8 with white pages that sold for substantially more, over 4 times more. This one sold for $3,883, an absolutely stunning copy. And while I personally do collect 9.8s, I understand the argument that can be made that, you're paying over 4 times the price to go just from a 9.6 to a 9.8 for some of these really big books. And for some people, it doesn't make sense. They can't justify the price difference. And I can understand that completely. It's just a big, big price discrepancy. And this price of $38.83 is actually down, believe it or not. This was Star Wars #1 in a 9.8 was running between $4,000 and $4,500 pretty regularly over the last 6 to 9 months. But obviously with the comic book market down, not a lot of Star Wars content that's out there right now other than the new Ahsoka series that's coming, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. Star Wars #1 has come back down to earth just like all these other big, really expensive comics. So if you do want a 9.8, now's as probably as good a time as any. Obviously, if we have a recession of some sort or some kind of problem on a macroeconomic level, this book will probably drop even further, just like every other book. But in my opinion, if you can aim for $3,500, certainly under $4,000 for a 9.8 for Star Wars #1, I think that's probably the target to aim for. I still think that we might see $3,500 again, if not below that, in the near-term future. Whether that happens or not, who knows? But I'm hoping this book comes down even more. I would love to pick it up for closer to $3,000, but I don't know if that'll ever get that low. But I've said the same thing about some other key issue books, and they certainly have hit my price targets over the last 6 to 9 months. Next up is another one that's kind of a secondary key that we've talked about in the past. Now's a really good time to pick this one up. This is Star Wars #7. So this is the first non-adaptation book from the original run. So obviously 1 through 6 cover A New Hope, the adaptation of the original Star Wars film. This would be the first expanded universe book. It's also the first appearance of Crimson Jack, who's kind of a known scoundrel. And there's been rumors off and on that Crimson Jack may make an appearance at some point in some Disney content, but this is a great book. This is a really great book from 1978, and this one sold in an auction for $177.50. That's the lowest I've seen in a while. It'd been hovering kind of around $250 or so lately. Before that, it was even higher, over $300. But wow, that to me, to get the first non adaptation book in Star Wars comic book history. That's a pretty big deal to me, and it's certainly a great cover with Han Solo and Chewbacca in that very 70s vibe on the cover. So anyway, it's a secondary key. I'm not saying it's going to like be worth $1 million or anything in the future, but certainly one I'd love to have in my collection, especially at that price. That's a really great price there. Next up is one I do have in my collection, and this is Star Wars number 21. This is the first original Darth Vader story, so non-adaptation story. It's a great 70s vibe to this cover from 1979, Shadow of a Dark Lord. Beautiful cover, absolutely beautiful. I'm so glad I have this in my collection. And this one's actually held up really well, despite the comic book market on the downturn. This one sold for $350. I paid $338 for mine. So to me, this book, has kind of bucked the trend, so to speak, with the comic book prices coming down, and it seems to be hovering very steadily between, let's call it $325 and $350. And I think that you could definitely spend your money a lot worse than getting Darth Vader's first solo original story in comic book form in a 9.8 grade. That's a beautiful cover. Really happy I've got that one in my collection. Next up is another one I do have in my collection, although mine's the direct edition, and I had to show you this one. This is the newsstand edition for Star Wars number 42, the first appearance of Boba Fett, as well as the first full appearance of Yoda in comics. A pretty timeless cover. I absolutely love my copy. It's, again, a direct edition, but this is the newsstand. You can see the newsstand barcode there in the lower left, and this has obviously been freshly graded by CGC because now they do note them on the label as newsstand editions. So I knew this one was going to go for big money. I was expecting $2,500. It blew well past that number. It sold for almost $3,100. So that's the highest price I've seen for a newsstand for Star Wars number 42 in a while. It peaked at $5,500 during the Book of Boba Fett early last year. So it has come down, but it's still a lot higher than what I was expecting. Again, I was kind of expecting $2,500, and it closed at $3,100. So beautiful example, though, of Star Wars number 42. Be careful on this book, because when I was kind of shopping for my copy, I did note a lot of them where the Newton rings, the oil slicks that you see on the front of some cases, are very, very noticeable because of the white background on this cover. So be very careful. Make sure to zoom in on all the photos. This one does not have any Newton rings that I could see, given that it's freshly graded with the fourth generation CGC case. I didn't expect it to, but there are some still coming out with these brand new fourth generation cases from CGC that still do have Newton rings, which is kind of embarrassing from my perspective for CGC, because CBCS, you never see Newton rings on those books. I'm sure they might exist, but you very rarely see them. So clearly they're doing something differently than CGC to avoid those Newton rings. So CGC, they need to get their act together. But it is a lot less common with these brand new case styles. You don't see it nearly as much. But again, I just got a couple of them back from CGC in the last 2 or 3 months that are the fourth generation cases that also did have small Newton rings. So just be careful out there, especially on this book, Star Wars 42. Next up is Star Wars 43 in a newsstand, again, brand new grading case. And this is one I had in my What to Buy video, The Betrayal at Bespin. Great cover. Great cover. This is the first appearance of Lando in comics. And again, this was the newsstand edition. It sold very quickly after my What to Buy video because it's a fair price. It was listed at $400. There's some that sold as low as $380. I've seen as high as $420. So $400 was right in the middle, and it was a very fair price. And I think one of you must have picked it up because it sold within an hour of my What to Buy video going live. And I think you made a good choice because that is a beautiful book for that price. I paid more for my direct edition than this newsstand went for, so I thought that was a great deal. Next up is another one I don't have in my collection. It's a secondary key, but one I'd like to get in the newsstand, and that's Star Wars number 44. This is the first time that Darth Vader tells Luke that he is his father in a comic, and obviously it's the adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back. Look at that cover. This cover is unbelievable. I absolutely love this cover. Great secondary key. I believe also, don't quote me on this, but I think it's the first appearance of the Slave One, Boba Fett ship in comic books, but don't quote me on that one. But this is, I mean, whatever the significance of this book, I don't even care, man. This book is just awesome. It's just a great cover. I definitely want to get this one in a newsstand because the direct editions are actually fairly common, but to get it in a newsstand is a little bit less common. And, there's certain books I pick and choose as to which ones I aim for newsstands versus direct editions now, just based on the census numbers. If there's like 4,000 books of a book in a direct edition, but maybe only, a third of that number or less in a newsstand, and it's not significantly more expensive, then I aim for the newsstand. I just think it's a better collectible. But this one sold for $177.50, which is a fantastic deal. I would have paid that all day long. I'm right in the middle of saving up for what I consider to be a really big book. And so I'm just trying not to buy anything, but I was super tempted on this one. $177.50 was a bargain. If one of you got that, congratulations. That's a really good buy, in my opinion. Next up is Star Wars number 81 in a direct edition. This was a CGC 9.6. This one sold for $123.50. This is the return of Boba Fett after he, it's kind of like a non-adaptation that kind of covers after the Return of the Jedi, I believe. And I think the Jawa in this book, the Jawas saved Boba Fett from the Sarlacc pit, whereas in the book of Boba Fett, the Tusken Raiders did. So, it's not canon, but it's just a great painted cover. And I've got this one in a 9.8 direct edition. This 9.6 sold for $123.50. I've seen a 9.8 sell for $175. So to me, I would rather pay $50 more and get it in a 9.8 versus a 9.6 for $123.50 that sold in an auction. So I think if you're patient, you can probably get it for a little bit better deal than a 9.6 for $123.50. Just pony up and get the 9.8 for $175 to $200, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. This is another book. I was speaking with Jason W., who's a Patreon supporter and a good friend of mine. And by the way, Jason, you have the most incredible comic book collection. My goal when I grow up is to have a comic book collection as good as yours. But we were talking about this book. He picked this one up in a newsstand, and that's Droids number 1. This was a direct edition that sold for $171.50. To me, this is a great book to get, and I might have covered this in the past, so I apologize if I have. To me, this is a great book that's undervalued. I think that you could really spend your money a lot worse than spending under $200 on this book. This is a 1986 book, Droids number 1. It kind of is the adaptation of, the Droids cartoon to a certain extent, I guess. And, it's maybe a little silly of a cover. It's got two robots, Rock'em Sock'em robots going on in the background with C-3PO, a very stylized C-3PO and R2-D2 there. But to me, it's the first issue in this series. And, to me, in a newsstand or in a direct, I think that this is a good buy. This is a really good buy right now, and probably undervalued, in my opinion. This is kind of valued in the similar art to the adaptation of Return of the Jedi number 1, which it's that one actually goes for a little bit less. But to me, this is probably the not as good of a cover as Return of the Jedi number 1, but this is probably the better long-term investment, I think, personally. So just my personal opinion, this has probably got a smaller print run, if I had to guess. I bet it's got a smaller CGC 9.8 ratio, too, than Return of the Jedi number 1 adaptation. So just an idea for those of you that like these vintage comics. I think that this is an undervalued one. Next up, let's dig into some Dark Horse books. This is Clone Wars number 1. Obviously, the first appearance of Captain Rex and Ahsoka in comics. I've got this one in my collection. And I've gone on record, and I stand behind it, that now is not a good time to buy this book. This book has jumped up recently because obviously we have the new Ahsoka series coming out. The trailers are starting to drop. Excitement's starting to build. And, there's probably a 70% chance that the series is mediocre. I hope it's not. It looks good. It looks really good. But, with Disney's track record, you can probably make money by betting that any given Star Wars series that comes out from Disney is going to be mediocre to bad. And, Andor was certainly the exception. I think that Obi-Wan was better than mediocre. Book of Boba Fett was mediocre to bad, in my opinion. But I hope the Ahsoka series takes after Andor and is good. But now is not a good time to buy this book. Just try to avoid this book if you can. Wait for 6 to 9 months after the Ahsoka series comes and goes and people have moved on, and this book will come back down to earth a little bit. I bet you can get it for $1,500 to $1,600 if you wait. This one sold for $20.25, so that one is up. That's about, let's call it 15% higher, or maybe higher, maybe more than that, maybe more like 20% higher than what I paid for my copy back in December of last year. So it's gone up a lot. So I would avoid this book, but it's certainly a beautiful book. It's not particularly rare, though. I mean, I think there's 400 plus copies in a 9.8 grade. Don't quote me on that number. So it's not hard to find, and it's going to come up pretty regularly over the next year or two. I would wait and spend your money elsewhere until this book comes back down a little bit. Next up, we've got another book in my collection that I recommend while it's down, and that's Kodor No. 9, the first full appearance of Revan. Timeless cover. This is a book you buy right now, and in 10 years, I'd be shocked if you didn't make money on it. This is just one of those awesome books that I don't know if I'll ever sell my copy. You know, if they come out with a Revan series or they announce a Revan series and this book all of a sudden goes to $1,500, I'd be tempted to sell my copy. But this one sold for $586 and change. That's well down. And it's been kind of going 600-ish, 650, 700-ish. It was up to, like, I think the peak was $1,200. So it's less than half of where it was. I would buy this book right now. This is a really great timeless cover. When I hold this book in my hands, this is, every time I hold it in my hands, this is like, wow, this is one of my favorite covers ever from Star Wars. I just love it. I can't explain it. It's just one of those amazing covers that I just think it's just incredible. It's just a simple kind of timeless cover that captures Revan's kind of conflict between the light and the dark side. And if you know anything about him, he's just a very complicated character that is tailor-made for a live-action show of some sort, or a movie. I mean, he's just awesome. So I would buy this book right now while it's down, because it's getting kind of near bottom prices, in my opinion. Next up is another book that you'd probably want to pick up right now, and that's Kodor No. 42. And this is the origin of Revan. This is another book I've got in my collection. This one sold for $321. I've seen as low as $275. So, you know, that's well down. This was kind of $600 to $800. I know a collector that paid $1,000 for his copy. I think I paid in the neighborhood of $450, maybe $500. I'm going on memory, but it's a great cover. And I think this is a book that is kind of near the bottom, in my opinion. Great cover. So those two books, Kodor No. 9 and Kodor No. 42, are two books that I would target right now while they're down. Another book that I think I would pick up while it's down is Darth Maul No. 2, the first appearance of Cad Bane. This is another one I had in my What to Buy video, this particular book, and it sold for $150 very quickly after my video aired, and I think that's a good buy. I mean, you can probably get it for a little bit less in an auction, $125-ish. Get it now while it's cheap. Cad Bane's coming back. I'm going to go on record on that. Same with this one. This one also sold after my What to Buy video. This is Cad Bane's first cover appearance, Darth Maul No. 3, the issue that just came after the one we just looked at, and that one sold for $100. So, you know, spend $250 and get both of those books, or less, and get both of those books, because I think you're gonna be very happy that you did while they're down. Next up is one I do not have in my collection, and that's Free Comic Book Day, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, the first appearance of Savage Opress. Great cover, black cover, and you know, I don't know what the CGC 9.8 ratio is on this one, but I bet it's not that great, because it is a very dark cover, and it's a great cover too. It just kind of captures Opress's inbuilt anger. He's like me when it comes to my kids leaving the lights on in my house. Just like a simmering anger. So this one sold for $240, free shipping. I think, you could probably do a little bit better than that, but not much. You know, $220 is probably a bare bones number right now. Maybe you get lucky in an auction and you get it for under $200, but I think $240 is a fine deal. It's, you know, any comic book that I'm talking about, it can be plus or minus 20 or 30% on any given day. It just depends on who's looking and what the market looks like and what the rumors are out there. So, you know, if you see these prices and they seem a little high or they seem a little low, you know, any given month they can be plus or minus 30%, believe it or not, for some of these less expensive books. Maybe not for the bigger books, but for something like this, I've seen as low as $180. I've seen as high as $270. So that one's kind of right in the middle. Next up, Darth Vader No. 3. I keep bringing it up, but, you know, there's a ton of these on the census. The 9.8 ratio on the cover A, first print, is not good, you know, meaning that there's a lot of them in a 9.8. So this book may never do anything, but I do think it's worth having in your collection, especially at today's prices. $227 is what this one sold for. That's a pretty good buy. I thought this was a good buy as well. This was a CBCS 9.8 of the second print, and this one was signed by Adi Granoff. You can see the signature right there, a nice silver label there. So that's the cover artist, and this was a 9.8 with the yellow label, sign, witness signature, Adi Granoff. So this was a 9.8 of the second print. That one sold for $137.50. That's a really good buy. I think that's a good buy. I'm not big into CBCS's labels. I just think they're ugly. But to get the cover artist signature in a nice kind of silver label there in a 9.8 grade, I would pay that. I would pay that all day long. That's a really good buy. Next up is the big one that I love to get at some point, and that's Darth Vader #3, the 1 in 25 variant edition. This is the Salvador Larroca 1 in 25 for Dr. Aphra's first appearance. And this book also has come down, although it's bounced off the lows. This one was selling in the $2,000 plus range. Then it got all the way down to $1,100, believe it or not, in a brand new case, 9.8. This one sold in an auction for $1,300. And one of y'all asked me, Byron, he asked me, what do you think a good bare bones price for this one is before this auction ended? I said $1,100 because that's what the last one sold for in an auction. This one sold for $1,300. So this one has bounced off a little bit off of the lows. It's a great cover, though. And there's not a ton of these in the census, but there's more than you'd expect for a 1 in 25 ratio variant. So, I wouldn't overpay on it. I think $1,300, no offense if you bought it. I think $1,300 is a little bit of an overpay. I bet you can probably pick it up for between $1,100 and $1,200 with patience in another auction. Maybe you check out some of the alternative auction sites where there's not as many people bidding, like Comic Link or My Comic Shop. Just keep your eyes peeled, set up some searches on those two websites, and I bet you can pick it up for under $1,300. But is it a bad buy? I don't know. I think if Dr. Aphra makes her live action appearance, I think you could see that book bounce quite a bit. So that's a great book. Next up, Solo Adaptation #1, the standard cover A. That one sold for $76.60. Good deal. That's a really good deal on that one. Next up, we're gonna finish off the video with some really nice books that are non-Star Wars. This is Secret Wars #8. This is the origin of the symbiote that makes the black costume for Venom and for the black costume for Spider-Man. This is the direct edition that sold for $635, but a newsstand edition sold in an auction. What do you think it sold for? This one sold for $635. The newsstand edition sold for $1,550. And there was another newsstand edition on Comic Link that sold for $1,600. So if you want the harder to find newsstand for Secret Wars #8 in a newsstand, that is going for about $1,600 right now. So this was a much cleaner copy, better centering. The colors look more vibrant than this one. This one had a little bit of an overwrap, and the colors are a little bit more faded. So this one got bit up a little bit, but that's a beautiful example. Next up, G.I. Joe Special #1. This is on my short list. This one was listed for $940, and it sold for $850. This reprints a previous G.I. Joe issue, issue number 61, where Cobra Commander gets killed. This one features Todd McFarlane art, though, as well as an homage cover to Spider-Man #1, the Spider-Man cover homage with Snake Eyes in the classic pose. So this book, there's not many of these on the census, and this one did sell for $850. So that one's on my short list. I'd rather have G.I. Joe #1 first, though, but then that one's probably next. And then finally, a newsstand edition of Hulk 340. I've got the direct edition. This is a book I'd love to get. I'd love to get a newsstand edition. This one sold for $3,612. I've seen as low as $2,800. I saw another one that sold at My Comic Shop last year for $3,300. So this one, too, has bounced up a little bit. But this is a beautiful example of Hulk 340 in the newsstand. That one sold for $3,600, big ones. Wow, that's a big number. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this look at both non-Star Wars books as well as mainly Star Wars books that have sold here recently. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.